Step aside. First class is not for people who wander up here hoping nobody checks. Brittany Vale's voice cracked across the Beacon Air lounge like a champagne glass shattering on marble. Conversation stopped. A man lowered his newspaper. Two women near the espresso bar turned slowly in their seats. The black woman standing at the boarding gate did not move. She wore a long charcoal wool coat with faded cuffs and carried a weathered leather handbag tucked tightly beneath one arm. "Ma'am," she said calmly, "it is a paper ticket." "I am boarding row 2. Brittany laughed once. Sharp. Mean. A paper ticket? Seriously? She held up the cream-colored boarding pass between two fingers like something dirty. "You expect me to believe Beacon handed this to you?" The giant windows behind them framed the runway in cold morning light. Outside, a Beacon Air jet rolled slowly past the terminal, white paint gleaming, gold wing logo glowing beneath the sunrise. Inside the lounge everything smelled expensive. Leather seats. Fresh coffee. Citrus polish on imported wood. Men in tailored suits scrolled through stock reports while first-class passengers sipped mimosas beneath soft jazz drifting from hidden speakers. And right in the middle of it stood Tatum Lockwood, silent beneath 100 judging eyes. Brittany stepped closer. Her crimson nails tapped the scanner. "People like you do not walk onto Beacon class because you found a coat and a ticket." A quiet murmur spread through the lounge. Somebody lifted a phone. Recording. Tatum felt every eye on her coat. The old wool. The frayed stitching near the wrist. The small repaired tear near the pocket. Her mother had sewn that tear herself 20 years earlier beside a kitchen window in Atlanta while rain hammered against the glass. Tatum swallowed slowly and kept her voice level. "My name is on the ticket." "Then prove you belong here." Brittany folded her arms. "Ask nicely. Beg me to board you onto this aircraft." A man near the gate chuckled under his breath. Another passenger looked away awkwardly, pretending not to hear. Have you ever watched a room decide who matters before hearing a single word they say? Tatum stood perfectly still. 52 years old. African American. Calm enough to make angry people even angrier. Her eyes drifted briefly toward the polished brass sign behind the counter. Beacon Airways, founded 1948. Beneath the lettering sat a tiny engraved emblem almost nobody noticed anymore. Wings wrapped around a torch. Tatum's thumb brushed the edge of her handbag. Inside, beneath old receipts and reading glasses, rested a black leather wallet embossed with that same symbol. Hidden. Unused. Brittany snapped her fingers once. "Hello. I asked you a question." Tatum looked back at her. "Please scan the ticket." Brittany smirked. "There it is." That desperate little voice. A younger attendant standing beside the gate shifted uncomfortably. His name tag read Dylan. He glanced down at the ticket in Brittany's hand. Then his face changed slightly. "Brittany," he whispered. "Maybe just scan it." Brittany cut him off immediately. "Do not embarrass yourself, Dylan." She held the ticket up toward the lounge. "You know how many fake first-class passes we catch every month?" Nobody answered. Nobody wanted to. Tatum noticed something else. The scanner light beside Brittany's hand had flashed green for half a second before Brittany turned it away. Tiny. Fast. But real. Brittany saw Tatum notice it. Her jaw tightened instantly. "Security has already been alerted," she said loudly. "Beacon does not tolerate fraud in premium boarding areas." A ripple moved through the crowd. Fraud. That word changed the room. A woman near the champagne cart quietly pulled her designer suitcase farther away from Tatum's feet. The older man with the newspaper folded it carefully now, openly watching. Dylan leaned closer again, voice lower this time. "Brittany, row 2 is executive priority seating. And she is obviously in the wrong place. Tatum's grip tightened slightly around her handbag. Not from fear. From restraint. The giant departure board overhead suddenly flickered once. Then steadied. Flight BA 201 to London remained on time. Brittany stepped directly into Tatum's space now. Perfume. Mint gum. Perfect makeup. Perfect teeth. You know what I think, she said softly enough for only nearby passengers to hear. I think you found somebody else's ticket and thought confidence would get you through the gate. Tatum said nothing. I see this all the time, Brittany continued. People walk in dressed just well enough to make staff hesitate. Her eyes moved slowly over the old wool coat again. But this? She smiled coldly. This is not Beacon class. Dylan suddenly reached for the scanner. I can just verify, Brittany slapped his hand away. I said no. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Several heads turned again. Tatum finally spoke. Quiet. Controlled. You should scan the ticket. Brittany's smile disappeared completely now. For the first time, something uncertain flickered behind her eyes. Fast. Barely visible. Then it hardened into anger. No, she said. I think I am done entertaining this. She grabbed the boarding pass with both hands. Dylan inhaled sharply. Brittany, stop. Too late. The paper ripped clean down the center. Loud enough to cut through the lounge music. A woman near the windows gasped. Brittany tore it again. Then once more. 4 pieces. White fragments fluttered slowly through the air before landing across the polished marble floor beneath Tatum's shoes. Silence swallowed the room. Nobody moved. Brittany dropped the final piece and smiled. Now you are not boarding anything. Tatum stared at the torn paper for 3 long seconds. Her face did not change. But something colder settled behind her eyes. Slowly, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. Dylan took a step backward. The departure board above them flickered again. This time 3 Beacon flights switched suddenly from on time to delayed. Tatum unlocked her screen with one hand. Calm. Precise. Then she lifted the phone to her ear. Operations, she said quietly after the line connected. 4 words followed. And the color drained from Dylan's face before anyone else in the lounge understood why. Ground every Beacon plane. The torn pieces of the boarding pass still lay scattered across the marble floor when the first whispers started moving through the Beacon lounge like smoke. Did she really just ground flights? Who even is that woman? Security is coming. Tatum Lockwood lowered her phone slowly. Her face remained calm, but her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of her handbag. Across the gate, Brittany Vale laughed too loudly now. The kind of laugh people use when panic starts crawling into their throat. You think this is funny? Brittany snapped toward Dylan. She called somebody. That does not mean anything. But Dylan was no longer looking at Tatum. He was staring at the departure board above the lounge entrance. More flights had changed. Delayed. Hold. Gate return. His mouth opened slightly. Tatum heard another phone begin recording behind her. Then another. Somebody whispered the word fraud again. Somebody else whispered lawsuit. The airport suddenly felt colder. 3 hours earlier, before the cameras and whispers and humiliation, Tatum had stood alone inside a quiet brownstone townhouse overlooking the East River. Morning rain tapped softly against the windows while an old jazz record played low in the kitchen. The house smelled faintly of coffee and cedarwood polish. On the dining table sat a stack of untouched executive folders marked Merger Review, Urgent. Beside them rested a faded black and white photograph inside a silver frame. 3 men in military uniforms stood beside a tiny propeller plane. One of them smiled directly into the camera. Isaiah Lockwood. Tuskegee Airman. Founder of Beacon Airways. Tatum touched the edge of the frame gently before walking past it. She did not look like the chairwoman of a billion-dollar airline that morning. No diamonds. No designer suit. Just dark slacks and her mother's old wool coat hanging neatly over a kitchen chair. The cuffs were worn soft with age. The inside lining had been stitched twice by hand. Her mother had worn that coat during Beacon's first integrated holiday flight in 1963 after passengers complained about black flight attendants serving in first class. Tatum remembered her mother standing in this exact kitchen years ago saying quietly, "The quickest way to see who respects human dignity is to remove the signs of power." Tatum lifted the coat carefully and slipped it on. Then she opened a small wooden drawer near the sink. Inside sat a cream-colored paper boarding pass. Not digital. Not modern. Thick paper with embossed gold edges and the original Beacon insignia pressed into the corner. Row 2. Seat A. Her thumb brushed the seal slowly before sliding the ticket into her handbag beside an old pair of reading glasses. Her assistant Trina had called less than an hour later. "You are really doing this?" "Yes." "Without security?" "Yes." A long pause. "Tatum, if the board finds out you are testing airport staff personally again, then maybe the board should ask why I keep needing to." Silence. Then softer this time, "Your father used to do the same thing." Tatum looked toward the photograph again. "I know." Back at JFK, a gate agent rushed past carrying a tablet. Sweat glistened along his forehead. He avoided eye contact with Brittany completely. Tatum noticed that. Fear travels through corporations faster than truth ever does. Brittany folded her arms tighter. "You know what your problem is," she said sharply toward Tatum. "People spend one night watching billionaire documentaries and suddenly think confidence replaces class." Tatum did not answer. She bent slowly instead and picked up one torn piece of the boarding pass from the floor. Her mother's handwriting was still visible across the back in faded blue ink. "Fly with dignity, baby girl." A small boy standing beside his father near the lounge entrance stared at her quietly. "Dad," he whispered, "why are they being mean to her?" The father looked uncomfortable immediately. "Do not stare." The boy kept staring anyway. Tatum gave him a tiny smile before slipping the torn paper carefully into her handbag. "Have you ever been judged before people even learned your name?" A notification buzzed across Brittany's airport tablet suddenly. Then another. Her smile faded a little now. Dylan saw it too. Emergency Operations Review. East Coast Hold. Brittany turned the screen away quickly before anyone else could read it. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "Operations always overreacts." Then another message appeared. "Priority executive access requested." Brittany's throat tightened visibly this time. One of the nearby gate supervisors picked up a phone behind the counter and whispered urgently into the receiver while glancing toward Tatum every few seconds. The mood inside the lounge had changed now. Nobody was laughing anymore. Tatum stood quietly near the window overlooking the runway. Planes sat motionless beneath the gray morning sky. One by one, jet bridges began reconnecting to aircraft that were supposed to be airborne already. Somewhere deeper inside the terminal, alarms started chiming softly. Then Dylan noticed something half visible beneath the torn corner of the boarding pass sticking out of Tatum's handbag. A small black leather wallet embossed with the original gold Beacon torch seal. His face went pale instantly. Before he could speak, Brittany grabbed his arm hard enough to stop him. "Do not say a word," she hissed. But it was already too late. Because at that exact moment, the lounge doors burst open and 3 uniformed flight captains stepped inside, scanning the room like men searching for someone they could not afford to lose. The 3 captains entered the Beacon lounge fast enough to make the automatic glass doors slam against their hinges. Navy uniforms. Gold stripes. Faces tight with tension. Every conversation inside the lounge died instantly. Brittany Vale straightened her blazer at once, forcing confidence back into her posture. "Thank God," she said loudly. This woman just disrupted airport operations and threatened Beacon Air personnel. Tatum stood near the window without moving. Outside, grounded aircraft lined the runway beneath flashing service lights. A baggage cart stopped halfway across the tarmac like somebody had frozen the entire airport mid-breath. One captain scanned the room carefully before his eyes landed on Tatum's wool coat. Something flickered across his face. Recognition maybe. Or fear. But before he could step toward her, Brittany intercepted him immediately. "Sir, her credentials are fake." She somehow triggered an operations review. She lowered her voice slightly. "We believe she stole executive access information." Several passengers nodded now. The word stole spread through the lounge faster than facts ever could. A businessman near the bar muttered, "I knew something felt off." Another passenger whispered, "Nobody important dresses like that." Tatum heard every word. She had heard versions of those words her entire life. In boardrooms. At charity galas. Inside her own airline. People trusted wealth only when it wore the correct costume. One of the captains finally spoke. "Ma'am," he said carefully toward Tatum, "we need clarification regarding the operational freeze." Brittany folded her arms instantly. "See? Even they know this is insane." Tatum looked at the captain quietly. "Then perhaps operations should clarify why East Coast Control responded within 37 seconds. Silence. Tiny. Sharp. The captain's expression changed for half a heartbeat before he hit it again. Brittany noticed. "What is that supposed to mean?" Tatum did not answer. Instead she bent slightly and picked up another torn piece of the boarding pass near her shoe. Her fingers smoothed the wrinkled paper carefully. Like it mattered. Like it belonged to somebody she loved. Dylan watched her hands closely now. His throat tightened again when he saw the faded blue handwriting on the back of the ticket. "Fly with dignity, baby girl." He remembered seeing that exact phrase once before during orientation training inside Beacon headquarters beneath an old black and white photograph of the airline founders. No. That was impossible. Brittany snapped her fingers toward security approaching from the hallway. "Escort her out." Two airport officers stepped forward uncertainly. Not aggressive. Confused. One of them glanced repeatedly at the captains, waiting for direction. Nobody gave any. The lounge television above the bar suddenly switched from financial news to breaking airport coverage. A female anchor appeared on screen. Developing story out of JFK this morning. Beacon Air has issued an unexplained temporary hold on multiple East Coast departures. Phones lifted immediately across the lounge. Recording. Streaming. Whispering. Brittany's face tightened. "Wonderful," she muttered. "Now she has created a media circus too. Have you ever noticed how quickly people trust authority when authority sounds confident enough?" Tatum remained calm while the room quietly built a story around her. Fraud. Disruption. Dangerous passenger. The truth did not matter yet. Appearances did. One of the security officers finally approached her carefully. "Ma'am, we are asking you to come with us until operations resolves this." "On what grounds?" Tatum asked softly. Brittany answered before he could. "Fraudulent boarding credentials. Interference with airport operations. Refusal to cooperate." "I cooperated," Tatum said. "You destroyed the ticket." The words landed harder than shouting would have. Several passengers looked down toward the torn paper still scattered across the marble floor. Brittany felt the shift instantly and raised her voice again. "Enough. She is manipulating all of you." Then she pointed directly at Tatum's coat. "People like her study how wealthy travelers act. That is the scam. Dylan finally spoke up. Quiet. Nervous. Brittany, maybe we should contact executive operations before, stay in your lane. Her voice cracked like a whip. Dylan went silent immediately. But one of the captains kept staring at the beacon seal partially visible inside Tatum's handbag. Gold torch. Original insignia. Not public issue. His jaw tightened slowly. A memory was trying to surface. Somewhere beyond the lounge, alarms chimed again through the terminal. More flights changed to hold across the departure boards overhead. Angry passengers started crowding the customer service desk outside the lounge glass. The pressure inside the room was building now. Brittany could feel control slipping away, and people like Brittany never loosened their grip quietly. She stepped closer to Tatum one final time. "You want attention so badly," she said coldly. "Fine. We will settle this publicly." She turned toward the captains. "Bring her to gate 14. Let operations review her in front of everyone." Tatum's eyes narrowed slightly for the first time. Not fear. Calculation. Then the oldest captain reached into his breast pocket slowly and pulled out a folded paper memo stamped with the original beacon torch insignia. His eyes moved from the seal, to Tatum's coat, to the torn ticket in her hand. And suddenly, all the color drained from his face. The captain's hand tightened around the folded memo so hard the paper bent at the corners. For a moment he forgot Brittany was speaking. Forgot the passengers. Forgot the cameras pointed toward the scene. His eyes stayed locked on the gold torch seal partially visible inside Tatum Lockwood's handbag. Old beacon insignia. Not decorative. Not public merchandise. Executive issue. Retired 23 years earlier. "Captain." Brittany's voice cut sharply through the silence. "Are we seriously still entertaining this?" The older captain blinked once and tucked the memo back into his pocket too quickly. "We need to move this discussion to gate 14, he said carefully. Brittany smirked immediately, sensing control returning. "Exactly." She pointed toward the terminal hallway. "Let everybody see what happens when someone tries to manipulate airport operations." Tatum picked up the final torn piece of her boarding pass from the floor before following the group toward the gate. Calm. Measured. Her old wool coat brushed softly against the polished walls as passengers parted around her like she carried something dangerous. Phones followed every step. Recording. Whispering. Judging. Beyond the private lounge the airport noise hit harder. Rolling luggage. Boarding calls. Crying babies. Delayed flight announcements echoing through steel and glass. But underneath all of it another sound had started spreading. Frustration. Entire departure screens across Terminal 4 now flashed hold beside beacon flights. Angry passengers crowded customer service kiosks demanding answers. "What is going on with Beacon? I have a connection in Zurich. They said operations froze everything." Brittany kept walking ahead of Tatum like a prosecutor escorting a criminal through public view. "Do not worry everybody," she announced loudly enough for nearby travelers to hear. "Security is handling the disruption." Several people looked directly at Tatum after that. One woman clutched her purse tighter. A businessman muttered, "Unbelievable." Tatum said nothing. But as they passed gate 11, her eyes flicked briefly toward a maintenance monitor mounted beside the jet bridge. One glance. "That hydraulic pressure warning is false," she said quietly. The nearest gate technician looked up instantly. "What?" Tatum kept walking. "The left sensor is reading 6 psi low because the calibration line is delayed by 12 seconds. The technician frowned hard at the screen. "That does not make sense." He typed quickly into the panel. Then froze. The warning vanished immediately. How did she know that? Brittany spun around at once. Lucky guess. But the technician kept staring after Tatum now. Uneasy. At gate 14, the situation had already become chaos. Passengers packed the boarding area shoulder to shoulder beneath flashing delay notifications. Airport supervisors whispered into headsets while beacon staff moved frantically between terminals carrying tablets and printed manifests. The moment Brittany arrived, she raised her voice again. "This is the woman responsible for the shutdown." Heads turned instantly. Tatum felt the weight of hundreds of eyes again. Judgment came easy to crowds once somebody handed them a target. One of the younger supervisors approached holding a digital tablet. "We still cannot access executive override logs," he told the captains nervously. "Every authorization request keeps bouncing back encrypted." Brittany laughed once. "Because there is no authorization." She spoofed something. Tatum looked calmly at the screen from several feet away. "No," she said. "Your Dallas relay server is rejecting the East Coast cascade manually." The supervisor stared at her. "How would you even know that?" Tatum's gaze moved briefly toward the scrolling system error at the bottom corner of the tablet. "Because your firewall patch failed 3 nights ago." Silence. Tiny. Dangerous. The supervisor's face changed slowly now. He tapped into another menu. Then another. Sweat appeared along his temple. "Oh my God," Brittany stepped directly between them. "Enough." Her voice cracked louder this time. She is throwing around technical words hoping somebody panics. But panic had already started. A nearby operations manager lifted his headset suddenly. "Sir, she is right about Dallas." Brittany turned pale for half a second before anger covered it again. "This is insane." Tatum stood quietly beneath the departure board while the terminal lights reflected against the worn buttons of her mother's coat. People kept staring at the coat. Nobody noticed her eyes. Calm eyes. Observing everything. Remembering everything. The oldest captain stepped closer carefully now. "Ma'am," he hesitated over the word. "Where exactly did you get that boarding pass?" Brittany immediately interrupted. "Who cares? It is fake." Tatum slowly reached into her handbag. Every nearby officer shifted slightly at the movement. She pulled out the remaining torn pieces of the paper ticket and placed them together carefully against the counter. For fragments becoming whole again beneath the fluorescent airport lights. And for the first time, the captains could clearly see the faded signature embossed across the bottom corner beneath the beacon torch seal. Samuel Lockwood. The oldest captain stopped breathing for a moment. Because Samuel Lockwood had been dead for 11 years. And only 12 people in the entire airline had ever been issued boarding passes signed personally by him. The moment the captain saw Samuel Lockwood's signature on the torn boarding pass, the atmosphere at gate 14 changed. Not publicly. Not openly. But something underneath the surface shifted hard enough for everyone to feel it. Brittany Vale felt it too. And people like Brittany never loosened control when fear entered the room. They tightened it. Fast. "That proves nothing," she snapped immediately. Her voice came sharper now, almost desperate beneath the confidence. "Anybody can print an old signature." She reached across the counter and snatched the torn ticket pieces before the captains could study them longer. Tatum's hand moved instinctively toward the paper, but she stopped herself halfway. "Calm again. Always calm." Brittany held the fragments up like evidence in a courtroom. "This is exactly how scammers work. Vintage paper. Emotional stories. Confuse employees until somebody gets intimidated." The crowd around gate 14 murmured louder now. Phones still recording. Delayed passengers frustrated and restless. A businessman in a navy suit shook his head. "This woman shut down half the airport." Another passenger whispered, "If she really knew somebody important, security would have cleared this already." Brittany heard that and latched onto it instantly. "Exactly." She pointed toward Tatum again. No executive has stepped forward because there is nothing to step forward for. One of the captains opened his mouth carefully. Brittany, perhaps operations should verify the signature before we escalate this further. Escalate? Brittany laughed once. Captain, with respect, she already escalated it. Flights are grounded. Passengers are stranded. And now she is standing here pretending she knows internal systems. Her eyes narrowed toward Tatum. Which means either she hacked beacon operations, or somebody inside this airport fed her privileged information. The accusation landed hard. Several airport staff immediately looked uncomfortable. One supervisor quietly clipped his security badge back onto his jacket like he suddenly did not want to be associated with the scene. Tatum stood beneath the departure board while angry red hold warnings reflected faintly across her coat buttons. "You are inventing crimes now," she said quietly. "No," Brittany replied coldly. "I am protecting this airline." Then she turned toward airport security again. "Confiscate the ticket." Dylan stepped forward before the officers could move. "Wait." His voice shook slightly. Brittany whipped around instantly. "Excuse me." Dylan swallowed hard. "The signature. I think I saw it before during executive orientation archives." Silence hit for half a second. Tiny hope. Tiny mistake. Brittany destroyed it immediately. "You are a junior attendant who has worked here 11 months. Her voice cut clean through him. "Do not embarrass yourself pretending you understand executive credentials." Dylan's face reddened. He stepped back again. Quiet. Defeated. The crowd noticed. Crowds always follow confidence before truth. Brittany looked victorious now. "Thank you." She handed the torn ticket to one of the officers. "Bag this as evidence." Tatum's eyes followed the paper carefully. Not panic. Calculation. Then one of the nearby operations tablets suddenly chimed again. Loud enough for everyone to hear. "System priority lock, authorization override required." The supervisor holding the device frowned. "That is strange." Brittany snapped toward him immediately. "Ignore it." But the screen flashed again. Requesting chair authorization. Several captains saw it this time. So did Tatum. Brittany moved fast and grabbed the tablet before anyone else could read more. "Internal systems glitch," she said sharply. "Nothing relevant." Her voice came too quickly now. Too defensive. The oldest captain studied her carefully for the first time. Really studied her. "Brittany," he said slowly, "why would the system request chair authorization?" "Because operations is overloaded." "That is not how beacon routing works." Brittany's jaw tightened. "Since when are pilots IT specialists?" Emotional pressure rolled through the terminal now. Passengers shouting at nearby desks. Children crying. Flight attendants whispering behind covered mouths. And right in the center of it all stood Tatum Lockwood, silent while everybody else lost control around her. One of the security officers finally stepped closer holding a clear evidence pouch with the torn boarding pass inside. "Ma'am," he said awkwardly toward Tatum, "until this is resolved, you cannot remain near active boarding areas." Brittany smiled immediately. Finally. Tatum nodded once. No argument. No scene. But as she turned slightly to leave, the youngest captain suddenly noticed something stitched into the inside lining of her wool coat where the fabric had shifted open for half a second. Small gold thread. Almost invisible. A torch with wings. Original beacon founder insignia. Hand sewn. His eyes widened instantly. Because only founder families were ever given that embroidery. Before he could speak, Brittany stepped directly between them again. "Escort her out of the terminal." Then she lowered her voice toward Tatum, cruel and quiet enough that only nearby staff heard it. "You should have walked away after the ticket." Tatum looked at her for one long silent moment. Then her eyes moved briefly toward the evidence pouch holding the torn boarding pass. And for the first time all morning, the faintest shadow of concern crossed her face. Because tucked inside the folded paper fragments was something Brittany had not noticed yet. Something small. Hidden. And dangerous enough to change everything. The evidence pouch swung lightly in the security officer's hand as he escorted Tatum away from gate 14. Inside the clear plastic, the torn boarding pass shifted against itself with every step. Brittany Vale watched it carefully now. Too carefully. Because she had finally noticed what Tatum noticed earlier. Something hidden between the folded layers of paper. "Stop," Brittany said suddenly. The entire group halted in the middle of the crowded terminal corridor. Travelers squeezed around them carrying luggage while overhead speakers repeated delay announcements every 30 seconds. Beacon employees whispered near the customer service desk. Cameras still pointed toward Tatum from every direction. Brittany stepped forward and snatched the evidence pouch directly from the officer. "Open it. Ma'am. Open the bag." Her voice cracked harder this time. Nervous. Sharp. The officer hesitated before unsealing the pouch carefully. Brittany dumped the torn paper fragments onto the counter beside the boarding gate scanner and spread them flat with trembling fingers. Then everyone saw it. A second layer hidden inside the thick paper stock. Thin black material no larger than a postage stamp pressed beneath the boarding pass seal. One of the captains leaned closer instantly. "Is that?" Brittany grabbed it first. "It is nothing." But her hand tightened too fast. Defensive. The youngest captain stepped nearer. "No. Wait." He stared harder now. "That is not paper." Tatum remained silent beside the security officers while the crowd leaned inward around the gate like people watching smoke before a fire breaks loose. Brittany held the object between two fingers. Small. Matte black. A micro-embedded access chip. Old Beacon executive issue. Retired years ago. The oldest captain went pale again. "Where did you get that?" Tatum looked directly at him. "It was attached to the boarding pass." Brittany laughed immediately. Too loud. Too forced. "You really expect people to believe this woman somehow carries antique executive hardware in her purse?" "That hardware," the captain said quietly, "was never public issue." Silence hit again. Tiny. Dangerous. Nearby passengers exchanged looks now. Somebody stopped recording and lowered their phones slowly. The atmosphere was changing inch by inch. Brittany felt it slipping. "She stole it," Brittany snapped. "That is the only explanation." Tatum finally spoke again. Calm. Precise. "Then report it stolen." Brittany opened her mouth. Stopped. Because reporting it stolen would trigger a historical executive audit through Beacon headquarters. Everyone standing near the gate understood that instantly except the passengers. The operations supervisor reached toward the chip carefully. "Captain, should we scan it?" Brittany spun around so fast her badge smacked against the counter. "Absolutely not." Too late. The youngest captain had already taken the chip gently from her hand. He walked toward the gate scanner beneath the departure monitor while airport staff held their breath around him. "Sir," Brittany's voice lowered now. "Warning. You do not have authorization for that." The captain ignored her completely. He slid the black chip beside the scanner panel. For 1 second nothing happened. Then the scanner flashed gold instead of green. Every nearby Beacon terminal froze simultaneously. The departure boards flickered. Security monitors refreshed. And a single line appeared across the gate screen in bold white letters. Executive Access Legacy Verified. The entire crowd went dead silent. Even the airport announcement seemed quieter somehow. Brittany stared at the screen like it had punched the air from her lungs. That system has been retired for years. Exactly, the oldest captain whispered. Tatum said nothing. But inside her coat pocket, her fingers curled briefly around the old silver watch her father once carried during every Beacon board meeting. What do you think Brittany is really afraid of now? The scanner chimed again suddenly. Another line started loading beneath the first. Requesting legacy holder confirmation. Then the system froze. Error. Access denied. Brittany exhaled sharply in relief. There, she said immediately, grabbing onto the failure like a lifeline. The system rejected it. But the operations supervisor was already shaking his head slowly. No, he murmured. That was not a rejection. Then what was it? Nobody answered at first. Because every Beacon employee near the screen recognized the truth before saying it aloud. Somebody inside corporate operations had manually locked the verification process. Brittany saw the realization spreading and reacted instantly. Enough. She pointed toward security. Take her downstairs. Now. Brittany, one captain warned softly. You are interfering with an executive audit process. I am preventing a security breach. Her voice echoed through the terminal loud enough that nearby passengers turned again. This woman has manipulated systems, delayed flights, and inserted restricted access hardware into airport operations. She is not staying here another minute. The officers exchanged uncertain looks but moved toward Tatum anyway. One gently touched her elbow. Tatum did not resist. She simply looked once more toward the frozen gate screen. Executive access legacy verified. Still glowing. Still visible to everyone. Then Dylan suddenly stepped out from behind the operations counter holding his phone with shaking hands. Captain, he whispered. I think you need to see this. On the screen was a restored training archive photo from Beacon headquarters taken nearly 20 years earlier. A younger Samuel Lockwood stood smiling beside a little girl in an oversized wool coat with the exact same gold torch embroidery stitched inside the lining. Dylan's hands trembled so badly he nearly dropped the phone. The old training archive photo filled the screen beneath the harsh terminal lights. Samuel Lockwood stood smiling beside a little black girl wrapped in an oversized wool coat with gold torch embroidery stitched into the lining. The same coat. The same stitching. The same worn cuffs now hanging from Tatum's shoulders. Where did you get this? The youngest captain asked quietly. Dylan swallowed hard. Training archives. Beacon heritage orientation. Brittany moved instantly. Give me the phone. Dylan hesitated. Tiny mistake. Brittany snatched it from his hand anyway. This proves nothing, she snapped. A child in a coat. Seriously. But her voice had changed now. Less arrogant. More afraid. Tatum watched silently while the crowd pressed closer around gate 14 trying to see the image on the screen. One passenger whispered, that really is the same coat. Another muttered, then who is she? Brittany heard the shift immediately and reacted like somebody plugging holes in a sinking ship. Enough speculation. She shoved the phone back into Dylan's chest. Delete the photo. Dylan stared at her. What? Delete it. It is a company archive. I said delete it. The oldest captain stepped forward slowly now. Brittany, you do not have authority to erase company records. I have authority to stop panic. Her jaw tightened hard. And panic is exactly what this woman wants. Tatum finally spoke. Quiet. Heavy. No, Brittany looked at her sharply. No what? Panic is what happens when people protect lies longer than dignity. Silence. Sharp enough to stop movement around the gate for half a second. Brittany looked away first. Outside the terminal windows, grounded Beacon aircraft sat motionless beneath rain-streaked skies while service crews moved nervously between gates. The airport no longer felt like a transportation hub. It felt like a corporation holding its breath. One of the security officers gently handed Tatum back her handbag after checking it. "Sorry, ma'am." She nodded once. Inside the bag, beneath the silver watch and torn ticket fragments, her fingers brushed something older. A folded handwritten letter worn soft from years of opening and closing. Her father's handwriting. She did not remove it. Not yet. But the memory hit anyway. Samuel Lockwood standing beside her in a dark Beacon hangar 11 years earlier. Engines roaring in the background. "People will salute the logo before they respect the people carrying it," he had told her quietly. "That is when you test their character." Back then she had laughed. Back then he was still alive. The loudspeaker overhead interrupted the memory. "Attention Beacon personnel. Executive Operations Review now active for all East Coast terminals." Passengers groaned around the gate. Delays spreading wider now. Brittany rubbed both temples in frustration before suddenly turning back toward Tatum. "You planned this." "No, you walked in here dressed like that on purpose." Tatum met her eyes calmly. "Yes." The honesty hit harder than denial would have. Brittany blinked once. "Why?" Tatum's thumb brushed the inside seam of her mother's coat. "Because my mother wore this coat when people told her she did not belong on Beacon flights either." Nobody spoke after that. Even Brittany lost words for a moment. The youngest captain looked down slowly. He was old enough to remember stories about Beacon's integration protests during the 60s. Angry passengers. Boycotts. Black flight attendants forced to serve smiling customers who insulted them to their faces. Tiny clues were starting to connect inside his mind now. Too many. Too dangerous. Then Brittany recovered. "This is emotional manipulation." Her voice rose again, sharper than before. "You think bringing up race excuses shutting down an airline?" "I did not shut down the airline," Tatum said softly. "The airline stopped itself." The operations supervisor suddenly looked up from his tablet. "Sir," he whispered toward the captains. "The system just unlocked another restricted archive." Brittany spun around immediately. "Block it." Too late. A grainy black and white image appeared across the nearest operations monitor. A crowded airport terminal from decades earlier. Protesters shouting. Security pulling people apart. And right in the center stood a younger Samuel Lockwood beside a woman wearing the exact same wool coat. The image froze mid-frame. Then zoomed automatically onto a small silver pin attached near the collar. The oldest captain's face drained completely. Because he recognized that pin. Every Beacon executive did. Founder family issue. Never duplicated. Never sold. Slowly, his eyes lifted toward Tatum's coat. And for the first time all morning, he whispered her name before realizing he had spoken out loud. Lockwood. The moment the captain whispered Lockwood, Brittany Vale realized the room was slipping away from her. So she did the only thing people like Brittany ever do when truth starts getting close. She got louder. "Absolutely not," she snapped, stepping directly in front of the operations monitor before anyone else could study the old archive image longer. "One blurry photo does not prove identity." Her voice echoed across Gate 14. Passengers turned fully toward the scene now. Airport staff stopped pretending not to watch. Even the nearby coffee kiosk had gone quiet. Brittany pointed sharply toward Tatum. This woman manipulated Beacon systems, disrupted national operations, and inserted unauthorized executive hardware into a secured terminal. She turned toward the security officers beside Tatum. "Remove her badge access immediately." "She does not have a badge," one officer muttered carefully. "Exactly," Brittany fired back. "Because she does not belong here." The words landed hard. Public. Deliberate. Several passengers nodded instinctively. Uniforms always looked more believable than old wool coats. The operations supervisor glanced nervously between Brittany and the frozen archive image still glowing on the monitor behind her shoulder. Should we contact headquarters before making a final call? Brittany rounded on him instantly. Do you want to explain to stranded passengers why Beacon lost control of an entire terminal because employees became sentimental over a costume? Silence. The supervisor looked down. False victory. The crowd felt it too. Momentum turning back toward Brittany. Tatum stood near the boarding lane ropes while rain streaked across the giant terminal windows behind her. Calm. Tired. But not broken. You are afraid of a photograph, she said quietly. Brittany laughed sharply. No. I am afraid of incompetence. Then she jabbed a finger toward Tatum's coat. People like you study symbols. Old stories. Rich names. That does not make you family. One of the captains shifted uneasily at that sentence. Too cruel. Too personal. But nobody interrupted her. Power rarely gets interrupted in public. The terminal televisions overhead suddenly switched again. More breaking coverage. Beacon Air delays continue spreading across East Coast terminals this morning as internal systems remain under emergency review. Angry passengers groaned across the gate area. A man slammed his carry-on onto the floor. This is ridiculous. Brittany seized the moment immediately. Look around. She gestured toward the chaos spreading through the terminal. Families stranded. Flights frozen. Employees panicking. This is what happens when unstable people gain access to systems they do not understand. Tatum finally looked directly at her again. You still think this is about access? Tiny silence. Tiny crack. Brittany ignored it. Escort her downstairs. Two officers stepped forward more firmly this time. The crowd visibly relaxed. False justice settling into place. The woman in the old coat was finally losing. But just before security moved Tatum away, the oldest captain noticed something still partially visible on the operations screen behind Brittany. The archive image had not fully frozen after all. A data field remained open beneath the photograph. Employee record, Eleanor Vale, Ground Operations Support, 1968. His eyes narrowed instantly. Vale. Brittany's last name. He looked slowly toward Brittany. She saw him notice it. Panic flashed across her face for the first time all morning. Fast. Dangerous. Then gone. System glitch, she said immediately. Too quickly. Archive corruption. The captain kept staring. Do you know who Eleanor Vale is? Brittany's expression hardened. No, lie. Clear enough that even Dylan noticed it. Tatum said nothing, but her fingers tightened once around the strap of her handbag where the folded letter from Samuel Lockwood still rested hidden inside. Nearby, one elderly passenger studying the monitor suddenly whispered under his breath, I remember that strike. Nobody reacted except Tatum. Her eyes moved toward him instantly. Recognition. Pain. History. Brittany saw that too and cut him off before he could speak further. Sir, this area is restricted now. Then she turned back toward security louder than before. Remove her from the terminal immediately. One officer reached gently for Tatum's arm again. Ma'am, please. Tatum nodded once and began walking toward the security corridor beneath dozens of watching eyes. Some suspicious. Some guilty. Some suddenly uncertain. But as she passed the operations desk, the youngest captain quietly slipped Dylan's phone into her coat pocket without Brittany seeing. And on the screen, hidden beneath the frozen archive photo, a new message had just appeared. Legacy holder requested for executive board review, immediate presence required. The security corridor beneath Terminal 4 smelled like rainwater, stale coffee, and panic. Beacon supervisors crowded outside the restricted operations room speaking into headsets while red hold warnings continued spreading across the airport monitors overhead. Tatum Lockwood stood between two security officers near the glass doors while dozens of stranded passengers watched from behind the barricades. Phone still recording. Still judging. Brittany Vale stepped into the center of the hallway like she owned it now. And in that moment, she almost did. "This ends now," she announced loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Beacon Air will not allow fraudulent access threats to hold passengers hostage." Several travelers nodded immediately. Exhaustion was turning the crowd cruel. They wanted someone to blame. Brittany handed a printed incident report toward the security supervisor. "Sign the removal authorization." Tatum looked at the paper once. "Temporary federal access restriction." "You are banning her from Beacon property," one captain asked carefully. "Pending investigation," Brittany replied smoothly. "Standard procedure." "That is not standard procedure," the oldest captain muttered. Brittany ignored him completely. "Ma'am," the supervisor said awkwardly toward Tatum, "if you refuse to sign, airport police may become involved." Silence rolled through the corridor. Heavy now. Final. Tatum looked down briefly at the paper in front of her. Her mother's coat still damp from the rain outside. Her father's letter hidden inside the pocket near her heart. All around her stood people waiting to see whether she would finally break. "You planned this humiliation from the moment you saw me," she said quietly. Brittany smiled coldly. "No. You planned it when you walked in dressed like a victim." Sharp silence. Several employees lowered their eyes. Even Dylan looked sick now. Brittany pressed harder. "You wanted drama. Cameras. Sympathy." She leaned closer. "But you forgot one thing." Her voice dropped lower. "Meaner. This airport belongs to people with credentials." Tatum's hand trembled once near the edge of the incident form. Tiny. Human. The crowd noticed. Brittany noticed too. And she mistook pain for weakness. "Sign it," Brittany ordered. "Or security escorts you out publicly." The operations monitor behind them suddenly flashed again. Another system request trying to load. "Executive Board review in progress, access pending." Brittany saw it and immediately slammed her hand against the keyboard beside the screen. The monitor went black. "Technical issue," she snapped. The youngest captain stepped forward. "Why are you shutting down executive requests?" "Because there is no executive request." "Then why does the system keep asking for legacy confirmation?" Brittany's jaw tightened. "Captain, if you continue interfering, I will include your name in the disruption report too." False victory settling deeper now. Security moving closer. Passengers whispering louder. Airport police visible at the far end of the corridor. Tatum stood alone in the center of it all. A black woman in an old coat being told she did not belong in the company her family built. One elderly janitor pushing a cleaning cart slowly stopped near the hallway entrance. He stared at Tatum for several long seconds. Then his eyes widened slightly. Recognition. Tiny hope. "Miss," he started softly. Brittany cut him off instantly. "Move along." The janitor lowered his eyes immediately and pushed the cart away without another word. Tatum watched him leave. Another piece of history silenced. Brittany turned back toward the crowd. Everybody here deserves to know the truth. She raised the unsigned removal form higher. This woman triggered system-wide delays using stolen executive materials and fabricated heritage records. Murmurs spread instantly. "I knew it. Unreal. People fake anything now." Tatum finally looked directly at the passengers watching her. Not angry. Not pleading. Just tired. You really believe dignity only belongs to people wearing the right clothes? Nobody answered. Because some of them did. Brittany stepped closer immediately before silence could help Tatum. Enough speeches. She shoved a pen toward her. Sign the paper. One security officer reached gently for Tatum's elbow again. Another moved behind her now. Pressure from every direction. Public. Humiliating. Final. Slowly, Tatum took the pen. The crowd leaned in. Brittany smiled in victory. Then the phone hidden inside Tatum's coat pocket vibrated once. Dylan's phone. The screen lit faintly through the fabric. Incoming secure message. The oldest captain saw it first. His face changed instantly. Because the sender ID carried a beacon designation only 6 people in the entire airline still possessed. Board chair priority channel. Before anyone could react, a deep voice thundered down the corridor from beyond the operations doors. Stop this immediately. And every beacon employee in the hallway froze. The entire corridor froze the moment the voice thundered through the operations doors. Even the airport police stopped moving. Brittany Vale turned sharply toward the sound, irritation flashing across her face before something colder replaced it. Fear. The heavy glass doors slid open slowly. Leonard Pierce stepped into the hallway wearing a dark beacon executive coat over a silver tie loosened at the collar. Chief Operations Officer. 27 years with Beacon Air. Half the employees in the terminal straightened instinctively the moment they saw him. Brittany's confidence returned instantly. Mr. Pierce, she said quickly, almost relieved. Thank God. This woman triggered a systems breach and, stop talking. His voice cut clean through hers. Silence hit the corridor like pressure dropping from an airplane cabin. Phones lowered slightly. Passengers leaned forward. Leonard Pierce's eyes moved past Brittany immediately and settled on Tatum standing between security officers near the barricades. His expression changed for half a second. Not shock. Recognition buried beneath restraint. Then it vanished. Brittany rushed forward anyway. Sir, she used stolen executive hardware and manipulated legacy systems. We already prepared removal authorization. Leonard held out his hand without looking at her. The form. Brittany hesitated before giving it to him. He scanned the page once. Then looked slowly toward Tatum again. You signed nothing? No, Tatum answered calmly. Good. Tiny crack. Tiny shift. The crowd felt it immediately. Brittany forced a smile. Sir, the systems are unstable. She has been pretending to have founder access. Leonard's jaw tightened slightly at the word pretending. Behind him, operations staff rolled a portable monitor into the hallway connected directly to Beacon headquarters. The screen glowed blue beneath the fluorescent airport lights. Everyone watched it. Nobody breathed normally anymore. One of the captains stepped closer. Sir, the legacy scanner verified executive clearance before the system locked. Leonard nodded once without taking his eyes off Tatum. I know. Brittany blinked. You know. I received the override alert personally. A murmur rolled through the corridor. The passengers who had mocked Tatum earlier now stared harder at her coat, her posture, her silence. Things they dismissed before suddenly looked dangerous. Brittany reacted fast. Then you understand how serious this is. Her voice rose again. Passengers are stranded. Flights are grounded. She caused panic across the East Coast. Tatum finally spoke softly. No. Panic came after your choices. Silence again. Heavy now. The oldest captain looked away first. Leonard Pierce stepped toward the operations monitor while technicians typed rapidly beneath the glowing beacon logo. Restore the archive request, he ordered. Sir, Corporate security locked half the files manually, one technician answered nervously. Then unlock them. Brittany moved immediately between Leonard and the monitor. With respect, sir, we cannot let random people pressure executive systems because they know old company stories. Move aside, Brittany. Sir, move. The crack in her authority widened enough for everyone to hear it now. Brittany stepped aside slowly while the screen refreshed. System restore in progress. Nearby passengers pulled their phones up again, but differently this time. Not mocking. Watching. Waiting. Tatum stood quietly with rainwater still drying along the shoulders of her mother's coat. Leonard looked at her for several long seconds before asking one careful question. Where did you get the boarding pass? Tatum reached slowly into her handbag and removed the torn fragments from the evidence pouch. Her hands remained steady despite every eye in the terminal fixed on her now. My father gave it to me, she said softly. Brittany jumped in immediately. And now suddenly she has a dead executive father too. Nobody laughed this time. What do you think Brittany will do when she realizes the room has stopped believing her? The operations monitor suddenly chimed again. A restored archive file began loading line by line across the screen. Image verified. Legacy clearance confirmed. Associated holder, the text froze before the final line appeared. Brittany saw the hesitation spreading through the crowd and made one last desperate move. Turn it off. Nobody moved. I said turn it off. Her voice cracked now. Loud. Thin. Desperate. Leonard Pierce slowly took the old silver pin from the archive tray beside the monitor. Founder family issue. His thumb brushed the worn engraving once before he looked back toward Tatum's coat. Toward the identical stitching hidden beneath the lining. Toward the woman standing silently in the center of the chaos while everybody else fought around her. Then a janitor's voice suddenly spoke from the back of the corridor. Quiet. Shaking. I saw her here before. Heads turned instantly. The elderly janitor pushed his cleaning cart forward slowly into the silence. 11 years ago, he whispered. The night Samuel Lockwood died. And the entire hallway went completely still as the monitor behind Leonard Pierce flashed one final line across the screen. Legacy holder identification ready. The hallway remained silent long enough for the airport announcements to sound distant. Hollow. Unreal. Every eye locked onto the operations monitor glowing beside Leonard Pierce. Legacy holder identification ready. Brittany Vale stood frozen near the keyboard, her face drained pale beneath the fluorescent lights. The elderly janitor slowly removed his cap with shaking hands. I remember her father, he whispered. Mr. Samuel used to walk these terminals at night talking to baggage crews by name. Nobody interrupted him this time. Leonard Pierce stepped toward the monitor and entered his executive credentials manually. His fingers paused once above the confirmation key before pressing it down. The screen refreshed. One line appeared first. Legacy access chip authenticated. A murmur rolled through the corridor. Brittany shook her head immediately. That chip could still be stolen. Leonard ignored her. The second line loaded slowly beneath it. Boarding pass serial match confirmed, issued by Samuel Lockwood. Silence deepened. Passengers lowered their phones now instead of lifting them. The captain stood straighter without realizing it. Security officers stepped back from Tatum by instinct alone. Brittany's voice cracked sharply through the tension. This proved she knew someone important. That is all. Then the final line appeared across the monitor. Authorized holder, Tatum Lockwood, chairwoman, Beacon Airways. Nobody breathed. The airport noise beyond the corridor seemed to disappear completely. One passenger actually took a step backward. Another slowly lowered his suitcase handle without looking away from Tatum. Dylan covered his mouth with one trembling hand. The oldest captain straightened instantly and removed his hat. "Ma'am," he said quietly. The word hit the room harder than shouting ever could. Brittany stared at the screen like her mind refused to process it. "No," she whispered. "No, that is impossible." Leonard Pierce finally turned toward her fully. "You forced the chairwoman of Beacon Airways to beg for boarding access." Brittany's lips parted but no sound came out. Tatum stood silently beneath the terminal lights while the truth settled over the crowd piece by piece. The old coat. The paper ticket. The founder insignia. The grounded planes. Every clue suddenly fit together. The elderly janitor swallowed hard. "Miss Tatum," he whispered softly. "You look just like your mother." Tatum's eyes softened for the first time all morning. Tiny. Human. Then Brittany snapped back into panic. She never identified herself. Her voice rose again. Desperate now. "Nobody told me who she was." Leonard's stare hardened instantly. "That is your defense?" Brittany looked around wildly toward the crowd searching for support. She came dressed like, she stopped too late. Too many people heard the sentence begin. Shame rolled visibly through several Beacon employees standing nearby. One of the passengers who had mocked Tatum earlier quietly looked down at the marble floor instead. Leonard stepped closer to Brittany slowly. "Do you know why Beacon was founded?" Brittany said nothing. Isaiah Lockwood built this airline after black military pilots were denied commercial access despite serving this country. His voice stayed calm. Controlled. Dangerous. And this morning, his granddaughter was humiliated inside her own terminal because your staff decided dignity depended on appearance. Brittany's breathing turned uneven. "Sir. I was protecting the brand." Tatum finally spoke again. Quiet. Steady. "No," Brittany looked toward her weakly now. "You were protecting your assumptions." Sharp silence. Complete silence. The operations monitor chimed again suddenly. Another file unlocked automatically across the screen. Internal Culture Review, Confidential Incident Reports. Leonard's face darkened immediately as multiple flagged complaints appeared beneath Brittany's employee ID. Passenger profiling. Selective boarding disputes. Executive warnings never escalated. Dylan stared at the screen in shock. There were complaints before. Leonard did not answer right away. Because he was reading something worse. A final internal memo stamped 6 months earlier. Review suppressed per terminal management request. His eyes lifted slowly toward Brittany. "You hid prior investigations." Brittany shook her head immediately. "That is not what happened." "Then explain the suppression order." Her silence answered first. Around them, the entire corridor had changed sides now. Security officers no longer stood beside Brittany. They stood watching her. Passengers who once recorded Tatum like a criminal now stared at Brittany with open disgust. One of the captains quietly picked up the unsigned removal form from the floor and tore it in half. Brittany saw it happen and nearly collapsed against the operations desk. Leonard Pierce reached slowly into his coat pocket and removed his executive access badge. Gold. Beacon torch seal engraved beneath the title COO. Then he looked directly at Tatum. "Chairwoman Lockwood," he said carefully, publicly, for everyone to hear. "The board of directors is requesting your immediate authority regarding disciplinary action." And for the first time all morning, Brittany finally understood that the woman she humiliated now held the power to decide what happened next. No one moved after Leonard Pierce said the words disciplinary action. The entire corridor seemed suspended beneath the cold airport lights. Brittany Vale stood near the operations desk gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Her perfect composure was gone now. The confidence. The sharp voice. The smirk. All of it stripped away in front of the same crowd she had humiliated Tatum before. Leonard looked toward airport security first. Remove Ms. Vale's terminal access immediately. One officer hesitated only half a second before stepping toward Brittany. Ma'am, your badge. Brittany blinked hard. You cannot do this over one misunderstanding. Nobody answered. The officer reached carefully toward her beacon ID clipped proudly against her blazer all morning. This time, no one stopped him. The badge came free with a soft metallic click that somehow sounded louder than the shouting passengers outside the corridor. Several beacon employees looked away. One attendant near the gate quietly removed her own phone from recording mode. Brittany stared at the badge in the officer's hand like she no longer recognized the world around her. I protected this airline, she whispered weakly. Leonard's voice stayed calm. No. You protected your prejudice. Sharp silence. Final this time. The operations monitor behind them refreshed again. Complaint records continued scrolling beneath Brittany's employee profile. Passenger targeting reports. Internal warnings. Ignored investigations. One line stopped everyone cold. Recommended cultural review denied by terminal management. Dylan looked sick reading it. People reported her before. For years, the elderly janitor said quietly from the back of the corridor. Most just stopped believing anyone would listen. Brittany spun toward him desperately. That is not true. I watched you remove families from priority boarding because their clothes looked cheap, he answered softly. I watched you smile while doing it. The crowd that once supported Brittany now stood completely silent. A businessman who had mocked Tatum earlier slowly lowered his eyes toward the floor. Another passenger whispered, "Oh my God." Tatum remained calm through all of it. No triumph. No cruelty. She simply stood beside the window while rain slid across the glass behind her family's grounded aircraft. Leonard turned toward her carefully. Chairwoman Lockwood, the board is requesting authorization to terminate Brittany Vale immediately and refer the suppression reports for corporate investigation. Brittany's breathing broke apart. Please, the word barely came out. I did not know who she was. Tatum finally looked directly at her again. That was the problem. Silence rolled through the hallway once more. Brittany's eyes filled instantly. Not because she lost her job. Because she finally understood what everyone else understood now too. If Tatum had walked in wearing diamonds instead of her mother's old coat, none of this would have happened. Leonard motioned toward the operations screen. Restore all suspended complaints, he ordered. Effective immediately. Yes, sir. Reopen the diversity oversight review. Yes, sir. And ground all disciplinary authority issued by Terminal 4 management pending investigation. The terminal staff moved quickly now. Fast. Nervous. Systems updating in real time. Power shifting publicly. The same employees who ignored Tatum earlier now stepped aside respectfully whenever she moved. One of the captains approached slowly holding the torn boarding pass sealed carefully inside a fresh protective folder. Ma'am, he said softly, we restored it as best we could. Tatum accepted the damaged ticket with both hands. Her thumb brushed the faded blue handwriting from her mother one more time. Fly with dignity, baby girl. Emotional silence settled across her face for the first time all morning. The youngest captain cleared his throat awkwardly. For what it is worth, my mother flew Beacon during integration protests in 1968. Tatum looked at him quietly. Then she helped build this airline too. His eyes watered instantly. Behind them, security escorted Brittany away from the operations corridor. No handcuffs. No screaming. Just humiliation heavy enough to silence an entire terminal. As she passed the crowd, nobody defended her anymore. Nobody even looked at her. The same public judgment she once weaponized had turned completely around. Before disappearing through the security doors, Brittany stopped once and looked back toward Tatum. Why did you not tell anyone who you were? Tatum answered without anger. Because dignity should not require introduction. Nobody spoke after that. Even the airport announcement seemed quieter now. Leonard Pierce stepped closer holding a small velvet box in his hands. Inside rested the original beacon founder pin removed from the archive display. Gold torch. Wings spread wide. He offered it carefully toward Tatum. Your father asked me to return this to you one day, he said softly. When Beacon remembered what it was supposed to stand for. Tatum stared at the pin for several long seconds before taking it gently into her hand. And for the first time since entering the terminal that morning, the weight on her face began to shift from humiliation, to something closer to healing. 3 weeks later, the marble floors of Terminal 4 looked different. Not because the airport had changed. Because the people inside it had. A new sign stood beside the Beacon first-class entrance now. Dignity first, every passenger. Beneath the word sat a small bronze torch emblem modeled after the old founder insignia. Employees passed it quietly every morning on their way to work. Some touched it without realizing why. The viral videos from that day had spread across the country. News anchors debated corporate bias. Former employees came forward with stories. Beacon's board launched the largest customer dignity reform program in company history. Mandatory bias retraining. Anonymous reporting protection. Founder legacy restoration. But none of that mattered as much to Tatum Lockwood as the small things she noticed now. A gate attendant kneeling beside an elderly passenger to help re-tag a worn suitcase instead of dismissing him. A young mother in discount clothes being welcomed into priority boarding without suspicious looks. Employees learning to greet people before judging them. Healing never arrived loudly. Sometimes it sounded like respect returning one conversation at a time. Tatum stood quietly near gate 14 early that morning wearing the same charcoal wool coat her mother once wore. The torn boarding pass now rested safely inside a glass frame at Beacon headquarters beside the old black and white founder photograph. Not as proof of humiliation. As a reminder. Leonard Pierce approached beside her carrying 2 coffees. The board still wants you to replace the entire executive culture division, he said carefully. Tatum accepted the cup with a small smile. Culture changes slower than titles. Leonard nodded once. Your father would have been proud of what you did here. Tatum looked through the terminal windows toward the grounded planes finally back in motion beneath the sunrise. I did not ground the airline to punish people, she said softly. I grounded it because I needed Beacon to stop long enough to look at itself. Nearby, Dylan adjusted a passenger's luggage tag while helping an older couple find their boarding lane. He looked more confident now. Less afraid. Beacon had promoted him into passenger experience leadership after he testified during the internal review. When he noticed Tatum watching, he smiled awkwardly. Still carrying paper tickets, he joked carefully. Tatum reached into her handbag and showed him a fresh cream-colored boarding pass embossed with the gold Beacon torch seal. Some traditions deserve to survive. He laughed quietly. Then his expression softened. Thank you, for not destroying all of us because of one person. Tatum's eyes drifted briefly toward the terminal hallway where Brittany once stood humiliating passengers she thought did not belong. Systems fail long before people notice, she answered. If nobody speaks up, they keep failing. Across the terminal, the elderly janitor from that morning slowly pushed his cleaning cart past the gate. This time employees greeted him by name as he passed. Morning, Mr. Harris. Good to see you, sir. He stopped when he reached Tatum and carefully removed his cap again. Your mother used to thank every janitor before leaving the terminal, he said softly. Tatum smiled through quiet emotion. She said clean floors do not matter if people walk across them without dignity. Mr. Harris nodded once, eyes shining now. Then a small voice interrupted nearby. Excuse me, ma'am. Tatum turned. A little black girl stood beside the boarding lane holding a stuffed rabbit and a wrinkled economy ticket in both hands. Nervous. Unsure. Her mother stood behind her wearing a grocery store uniform and apologizing immediately. I am sorry. She just wanted to ask about your coat. Tatum crouched gently to the child's eye level. What about it? The girl pointed toward the gold stitching hidden inside the lining. It looks important. Tatum looked down at the old coat for a moment before answering softly. It reminds me not to decide who matters by what they wear. The little girl smiled slowly. Behind them, several Beacon employees overheard the sentence and fell quiet. One young attendant immediately stepped forward toward the child's mother. Ma'am, she said warmly, we can help carry your bags if you would like. No suspicion. No judgment. Just kindness. Tatum stood again as boarding began beneath the soft golden light pouring through the terminal windows. For the first time in years, Beacon Air felt a little closer to the airline her grandfather dreamed about building in 1948. Leonard glanced toward the old wool coat one last time. You know, he said quietly, most people would have worn a suit after what happened. Tatum brushed her hand gently along the worn sleeve her mother once stitched by hand beside a rainy kitchen window decades earlier. No, she answered softly. This coat finally belongs here. Then she walked calmly through the boarding gate where she had once been told to beg for permission to enter, while the crowd stepped aside in silence not because of her title, but because they finally understood her dignity was always there.